Hello and welcome to this wonderful video about Lake Tisza. As you can see, it's the title of the video. So in this particular session, I will talk about something that a lot of people asked me, which is why do I have a boat on Lake Tisza? And I talked about Lake Tisza some time ago, and there are some videos about that, but this time I would want to just sort of go deep into this one particular section of lake life, if you want to put that.
So a lot of people buy boats on the lake, mostly for fishing purposes. And that's the main activity when it comes to Lake Tisza.
If I have a boat, that means I can go into the middle of the lake, and assuming that it's a big lake, I can get lost between the reed and see birds and all sorts of stuff. It's just that's the whole thing, cruising around. That's what it means. It's lovely, it's fantastic, because now I am not confined to the shore with all the other people trying to get to the lake.
When it comes to lakes, there are two types as far as I'm concerned. One of them is like our Lake Balaton, which is basically a great big bathtub. Now, when it comes to Lake Tisza, there is vegetation all over the place. Tunnels created by islands of reed or real islands. And that's much more like wilderness to me.
You might be wondering what the whole history of Lake Tisza is, and then in this case it's an artificial lake because in 1973 they decided to build a dam. The lake actually created a very diverse new ecosystem. Now, I reside where the star is, in more or less the middle of the lake, and I use my boat to get from there to all sorts of places around the lake. There is some open water, but also lots and lots of reed or tiny islands with trees on them. And as you can imagine, before this place was a lake, there were hills and valleys and trees there, and these trees that we have in the middle of the lake nowadays are the remnants of those forests that were there.
So Lake Tisza originally was created by the order of the communist government or socialist government of Hungary at that time. Imagine yourself in that particular time and place. Environmentalism was not a big concern for these kind of people. However, as luck would have it, actually the whole lake, when it was created for the sake of generating electricity by putting a dam on the river Tisza, the actual lake that was created proved to be an environmental success.
So when I was a kid, my dad and I did go on the lake. We used to have that blow-up kind of tiny boat thing, but didn't get very far, as you can imagine. Once, I remember, we went to one of these close islands, tiny islands. It was magical to me. those of you who don't particularly watch my channel, I usually deal with Hungarian stuff because I'm interested in teaching a language. I'm also interested in English, which is less useful in this case. But here and there, because I do lots of traveling, I just upload stuff that is not exactly language. What I know about boats is very little. Don't have a license to operate a boat, although with a small one you don't need to have one. If you have something in Hungary, a sort of property, and you go there every once in a while and it's close to Lake Tisza, you could get yourself into this boating business because they are fairly cheap. Lots of German people do that, so you wouldn't be the only one struggling with the language barrier and all that sort of stuff. When I was a kid, with the blow-up kind of boat, we couldn't go too far, so
that middle part of the lake, for me, it was always a big mystery, up until now.
as I understand it, this kind of boat is based on what they had on the Titanic, for instance. It's quite fun, it's also quite stable and easy to maneuver, but this is not the kind of boat that people usually buy.
Because the average fishing boat is a lot more known to people, a lot of people actually choose it.
These are the things that people usually buy. You can buy a new one, it's pretty cheap, much less maneuverable. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that if you ever want to buy a boat, buy the one I have.
Let me talk about the mandatory equipment. You don't have to have a license, but you do have to have some sort of mandatory equipment.
So you have to have some rope, you have to have lights like a flashlight, you have to have something to take the water, sort of transport the water out of the boat itself. Ideally you'd have to have life vest, at least one, and then a pair of paddles. That's very important. The reason I got this particular boat is because I actually asked my dad. He's very knowledgeable when it comes to boats, and I just asked him because I honestly wanted to get one of those fishing boats. Because like I said before, I have no knowledge about this, so I'm only aware of that type of boat. And then my dad said like, hey, why don't you get this one? So I got that one. One of the first things that we did when I got my boat is that we got in the boat equipped with the electrical engine that I also have, and just sat off for a distant island, because that was the reason, that's the thing that was missing since my childhood. The island itself, any island on the lake, is quite fun. You can't reach them only with boats. There is no transportation on the lake, and on the lake there is nothing. To swim there, it's quite far, I have to say. Having that adventure and all that sort of stuff, that's fantastic, but it's a bit more personal. So let me take you on a tour instead about the lake and what it can offer you. So as you can see, there are these channels. So it's not just one big surface of water that Balaton would look like the biggest lake in Hungary. This is the second biggest lake, and it's much wilder, especially with all those tiny plant things on the side of the water, as you can see. But here, sometimes all the plants just cover the surface, and there are lots and lots of birds hunting for fish. And it's just quite tranquil and quite peaceful. Of course, there are the sunsets, which can be quite beautiful. Of course, ideally, there are no people around, especially on the lake. There are no wires except in villages, so ideally you would have a pretty flat surface, like a huge plain around the lake, and you can just witness all the fancy sunsets. So, I believe that's it. This is the end of the video. I've got nothing more to offer other than just a couple of pictures of the sunset, and I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to ask questions if you do have any. I'm always around to help people who would want to come to Hungary, even for a couple of months, weeks, or want to settle down. I always have some useful tips and tricks. That's mostly it. I hope you enjoyed this short video.